Okay, hi everyone, welcome. We will start on time, and then if people sign in and trickle in throughout, that's okay. This is Kim speaking. I'm a family engagement specialist at Child Care Resources with the KP&L program, and I am here with Wisteria. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, this is Wisteria Oliver. I'm the administrative specialist and contract manager with the FN team at CCR and the Kaleidoscope Play Learn program.
Welcome to the webinar on gender stereotypes in KP&L. And hopefully today we'll have some good discussions. Before we continue,
no escucho nada.
We just want to go over a few items, more like logistical things. We will upload a recording of this video after we finish onto our Child Care Resources YouTube channel, where we put all of our past webinars as well. So I encourage you to take a look at those on your own time. And then also we'll send a PDF of this PowerPoint to you at the end. So don't feel like you need to rush to take notes. Know that you'll be given all the information at the end. And then also for some technological ease, for this webinar, if you would like to speak or make a comment or ask a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself when you want to speak, and then when you're not speaking, go ahead and mute yourself on your own device. We plan on unmuting everyone and having everyone decide whether they want to be muted or unmuted based on when they want to speak. So hopefully that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, then go ahead and let us know. You can unmute yourself and mute yourself by clicking the microphone icon that you see in the GoToWebinar menu bar. And right now we will unmute everybody. All right. And then also if you want to type in a question, like into the question box, feel free to do that anytime, but we won't be going through those until the end of the webinar. Okay, so we're going to continue. All right, so the first thing that we wanted to start with is to ask everyone why they are here today and why they felt it was important enough to attend a webinar on gender stereotypes in KP&L. So I would like to hear people's responses. So go ahead if you'd like to say something to answer this question, unmute yourself and yeah, let us know what you think. And then if maybe you want to say something, but your mute and unmute is not working, you can type into the question box if you need to.
Well, Kim, I could say that I'm excited to be here at this webinar presentation today because I'm not so familiar with this topic, and I did some research on it to help prepare for this webinar, but I'm really excited to hear from our participants to find out, what's happening in the field and what type of things have been coming up in the field for people around the issue of gender stereotypes, especially dealing with young children and their families, because we reach such a diverse group and crowd of people that I know that the issues that may be arising across communities are diverse as well.
Thank you, Wisteria. I know for me, at least when this webinar was in development, something I was thinking about often was that there is a lot of emphasis on physical development and early math, early literacy, and so on, birth to 5. But I don't hear a lot of conversations about gender development during this time. And it's happening whether or not we talk about it or if we focus on it. And so I thought it was important to have a place where we could discuss this topic openly with everyone. All right. So moving forward, a couple objectives we have for today. It's really quite simple to think about gender stereotypes in the KPNL setting, and then also to give some information and resources for you to continue to learn. And at the end of the webinar, we'll have a slide of some resources and links that you can check out if you choose to do that. And something that I want to point out is that we're not really here today to change anyone's opinions. We really just want people to think about this topic. So if you spend today thinking a little bit more about stereotypes, gender stereotypes, even after this webinar, we consider that a success. And then I also want to note that a lot of people have some strong opinions about this topic, and that's totally okay. I think that it's important to remember that we can model being respectful to people's points of views, just like we would in a Kaleidoscope group, and then also to model to not make assumptions about people based on their background, knowing that we need to get to know people first before we can understand them, really. A note that I also want to make is that the webinar will be focused on child development and taking that angle for a bit, and we'll make suggestions later on in the webinar about what you can do in your KPNL group. But know that these aren't required at all. These are just options, and it's really up to you what you choose to implement in your group, because you are the expert of your Kaleidoscope group and you know what is best fit and best culturally appropriate for your participants. But there are two things I do want to emphasize is that people, caregivers, facilitators, us, no matter what our opinions are, we can agree that kids are growing and learning, and that understanding these child developmental milestones is really useful as it relates to gender. And so we'll be going over this basic development during the webinar. And then secondly, I just want to bring up that talking about our own biases and then also understanding that people have different points of views on this topic is really important. Being exposed to conversations with people who may think differently than us is healthy. And in the KPNL context, I think this is really great practice for facilitators, especially because your opinions may be different than those in your group. So this webinar is really just a place to gain more knowledge and tools really to prepare yourself to lead your group. Anyway, so we will just go over a quick outline on what we'll talk about today. Next, we'll define gender and gender stereotypes. And then we'll go over child development, language, and toys as it relates to gender. And then also ways to foster healthy gender development in your group. Some scenarios that may come up in your group and how to address them, as well as how to talk to caregivers and kids about this topic. And then we'll end with some resources and then answer questions at the end. Okay. So before we even really dived into this, something that we wanted to do was to define gender to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And that's a question that we wanted to pose to you all is, how do you define gender? And it could be in your own words, what you've heard it is defined as, whatever it is. Feel free to respond and unmute yourself to answer the question. I'll give people a moment to think about how they would define gender, because I know it's maybe not the easiest question. Okay, no one, that's okay. So what we did was we found a couple of definitions on what gender is, and we want to show you a couple of different ones so you can get an idea of how it could be defined differently. And the first, let's see, the first definition is this one, and it's short. It's the first definition that comes up when you type what is gender into Google. And it defines it as the state of being male or female, typically used with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. So that's one definition. And then the second definition that we found is the condition of being male, female, or neuter. In a human context, the distinction between gender and sex reflects the usage of these terms. Sex usually refers to the biological aspects of maleness or femaleness, whereas gender implies the psychological, behavioral, social, and cultural aspects of being male or female, for example, masculinity or femininity. And this definition is from the American Psychological Association. I think the takeaway between these two definitions is really know the difference between sex and gender, and knowing that sex is biological and that the majority of humans, when they're born at birth, they're assigned either to be male or female based on biology. And then gender does not have to do with the biological aspects. Gender is something that's created by humans in society, what people expect, beliefs, and it's based on culture, and it differs all over the world. I also just really want to note quickly that someone's sex may not match their gender. So for example, if someone is born a male biologically, later on in life, their gender identity may not align with being masculine, but maybe feminine. But it's really complex, this topic, and we won't have a lot of time to go over the complexity of it, and we'll stick to the basics for this webinar. But again, I really encourage you to continue to read more about this subject if you're interested. So that's gender. Hopefully everyone is on the same page now. And if anyone has questions, of course, feel free to speak at any time or type it into the chat box, the question box, I mean. And then Wisteria is going to talk a little bit about gender stereotypes. And then I forgot about this last question. Something that we want you to keep in mind throughout the webinar is how you'd explain gender to a child. And of course, that depends on age and the background and everything. But have that in your mind as we talk, and think about ways you would answer that in a group if that opportunity came up and you wanted to model how to effectively respond to that question. So it's always good to be prepared. And then Ms. Gear will talk about gender stereotypes.
Okay, so first off, we have a definition from the United Nations Human Rights Commission. And so they say a gender stereotype is a generalized view or preconception about attributes or characteristics that are or ought to be possessed by, or roles that are or should be performed by women and men. It goes on to say that simplistic generalizations about the gender, attributes, differences, and roles of individuals and or groups. Stereotypes can be positive or negative, and they do not always communicate accurate information about others. So we know that in our society, many stereotypes exist, and there certainly are gender stereotypes. So one example of a gender stereotype, a simple one, might be that blue is for boys and pink is for girls, and that all girls like pink and that pink is a girl's color, for example. Okay, so next we're going to talk about gender and child development. So we'll go through the stages of child development. At infancy, as early as infancy, children start noticing gender, and they start to tell differences as early as 6 months. They get these messages from adults' appearances, activities, and behavior. Caregiver interactions shaped by a child's gender forms child understanding. Between 18 and 24 months, the mind of children, they begin to define gender from sources. They begin to develop a sense of self. They're able to observe patterns in the home in the early learning setting. And gender for this age group also starts to be a way to understand group belonging, which is important for development. So between 3 and 4 years of age, most kids are able to identify as a girl or a boy, and they begin to connect the concept of girl and boy to specific attributes that they've absorbed thus far in their life. They develop stronger expectations of gender behavior and looks. And then between 5 and 6 years, that's when some rigid thinking really starts to develop, and it decreases with age. As kids move beyond this stage, they're able to think a little bit more abstractly. But between 5 and 6 years, kids, they know the rules, and whatever the rules may be, whether it's societal rules, implied or explicit, and they feel pressure to follow the rules, and they're not yet able to think deeply about beliefs and values and where those might come from. And a child who doesn't want to wear things typical of their gender is likely to be aware that others find this curious, that maybe they're not quite fitting in exactly with the group the way that they might see other people doing so. And just to kind of put it out there, with any child development scale or schedule, these things are broad generalizations. So not all kids will fall exactly into these checkpoints, and some of these behaviors may present a little bit earlier or later in a child's development, but this is just a generalized checklist. So talking about gender with child development, just the way that children process the world, one of the big tenets of Kaleidoscope Play and Learn is that children learn through play. And one of the ways that children learn about gender is through play. And this is completely normal. They need a safe and nurturing environment to learn, express, and explore gender. So through play, children begin to define themselves and others. And it's natural for them to ask questions to help them sort out the differences between girls and boys. This is an exploratory time in their life, and they're just trying to learn. It's normal for boys to want to engage in stereotypically boy activities and for girls to want to do girl activities. And it's also normal when they don't want to do those things and maybe they want to do the opposite. From a child's point of view, playing with a certain toy or wearing a certain type of clothing, it simply means I like this, I want to know more about this. It doesn't necessarily mean, my gender identity is solid and expressed, and it's not necessarily a social statement. It's a period of exploration for the child. And even though children are developing these skills as they play and learn, a child at your Kaleidoscope groups may not yet fully understand how their choices may be commonly associated with one gender or another. Some kids might notice that early on and right away and be real crystal clear about that, and other kids maybe not. And from an early learning professional perspective, making these kinds of choices is part of a healthy child development. So it is healthy for kids to want to explore and play with gender roles and gender identity. And this is how children express their developing sense of self. And as they are developing their sense of self, they are learning about gender expectations from their surroundings. So as people and their peers are responding to them, they're learning more and more. And cultures provide expectations for boys and girls, and children begin learning about gender roles from their family, cultural background, and the world around them. So these messages are coming, from a variety of places in the environment. And since children are learning through play, and it is natural for them to play around with these things and have lots of questions. And so it's very important that we support this process. Okay, so this next slide here just kind of goes into gender stereotypes and language. So there's two lists of words here, and I think to attest to the prevalence of gender stereotypes, I can pretty much assume that everyone viewing this PowerPoint and this presentation can pretty much assume which list is the boys list and which list is the girls list. So our language is definitely loaded with gender stereotypes as well. And so I guess a question for the group is, how do you think the language adults use toward a child affects the child and the person they will become? So thinking back to those two lists, we have the girls list and the boys list, or rather, should I say, terms that would be stereotypically assigned to girls and terms that would be stereotypically used to describe boys. How might that influence a child's self-concept?
We can go back to that list too, because people want to look at it.
So the pretty, beautiful, adorable, bossy, emotional, that might be more words that are stereotypically used when referencing girls. And then smart, tough, strong, leader, aggressive, those would be words that we might see more frequently used when describing little boys. And it's not necessarily true. A little boy can be beautiful and a little girl can be tough, but due to the prevalence of gender stereotyping, we see these different types of words or these different sets of words assigned to different genders. And if you notice the list on the left, it's more focused on appearance. and the list on the right is more focused on performance. So this is just something to be mindful about when working with families, caregivers, and children, the language that we're using and the underlying message or the underlying value that we're conveying to children.
Yeah, would also add that I think the words being used with children, I think it definitely influences how they see themselves and like how they value themselves and what they're worth. So if a young child, a small girl, is constantly told she's beautiful and pretty, but the adults around her never use words like strong and intelligent to describe her, I think that does have an influence. She may not think of herself in those ways, and it may not empower her as much to maybe think about seeing herself as, you know, an intelligent person who can do really well in school, for example. So yeah, like Wisteria said, it's just good to think about the words you use with the kids who are around. Really
Can I add something?
Oh yes, please do.
Hi, this is Diana. And it starts even earlier, like one of the earlier slides where you showed children starting to recognize, notice gender and start to look at, what am I, a boy or girl? And even at that age, if we say like, these are girl things and these are boy things, that affects them, especially those children who don't fit into the stereotype boy or girl. And so a lot of boys love to play with dress up dresses and all those things. But if we label those as girl things, then they start to feel, that something's wrong with them. But if we just label them as sparkly or frilly or dresses, things you wear that you can twirl in, then it shifts things and allows that exploration to happen without, the stereotypes. I had the opportunity to just notice that when my son was younger and notice because the school allowed that, there was just a lot more children allowed to be expressive. They even had the kids on their own played tag, and there was a boys team and a girls team, and you could be in any team you wanted, So, I just wanted to say it starts much earlier if this being aware of the language you use and how it impacts children's sense of self.
Yeah, and I guess you could say it starts at birth right away, like everything that the child is absorbing, seeing and listening. Thank you, Diana, for sharing that. I think those are great examples of how facilitators especially can talk about the items, the toys in their group, and to not assign it to a specific gender, but to be more neutral about it. That's a really great idea. Anyone else? All right, we will move along now. So we answered that question. Okay, great. So we have a video. In the email that we sent out with the registration link to the webinar, we also asked if you could watch this video in advance if you had time. If you didn't, that's okay. We'll watch it right now. It's from the BBC, and hopefully the sound pulls through. If it doesn't, the video has captions in it, so even if you can't hear it very well, you should be able to read along, hopefully. So let's see if it plays. Perfect. It is.
Look at this. Look at this. You like it, didn't it? She's got fit on it. That's a good girl. You're a good little girl, aren't you, Sophie? Look, what does this say? Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams. Ooh, look at this, Sophie. Meow, meow. I think she liked that pink dolly the best.
If I were to tell you actually that Sophie is Edward,
Ah,
does that change anything?
I maybe thought, oh, this is a little girl, so I have to give her little girl things.
Hello. 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 Come on.
What's this one? What's that one do? Is that a robot? What about this? You like that one? What does this one do? Oliver. Oliver.
You've gone for, you could say, boy toys for this boy.
Possibly in my subconscious, but for me, I was just going for what was around me, but then perhaps my subconscious was automatically playing a trick on me that I was.
If I tell you that he is actually a girl.
Really?
Yes.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. I suppose it's because of the stereotype.
And then that changed your behaviour towards the child.
It did.
And your behaviour was quite
it
directive.
Did. 1, 2, 3. Beep, 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 beep. Can I see my robot?
She's been the robot, the car, the puzzle game. I think she's been much more physical in handling the child than the other adults have been with girls.
That really astounded me because I thought that I was somebody that had a really open mind.
Surprise. So I automatically went for the pink fluffy toy because it was a girl, so I was sort of stereotyping.
I've always thought I was rather more open-minded than that, and I would think, you know, these are children's toys, whatever the gender.
It will make me think the next time I'm with a child, so my niece or my nephew, to make sure that I am actually being sort of fair and equal with all of them, and just giving each child an opportunity to just be whoever they are.
All right. So we just wanted to encourage some discussion on the video and to talk about what you all thought of it, what came up when you were thinking about it, just general first impressions. Feel free to speak at any time. Maybe it made you think about what toys you have in your own Kaleidoscope group that you're maybe second guessing now, or maybe that you feel good about that you have. Possibly, maybe if you want to talk about, if it's come up, how you may or may not offer some toys to certain children based on their gender, things like that. Oh, let's see. Diana has something to say. Diana, I'm going to try to unmute you to see if you can talk. You should be able to self-unmute, but I'll go ahead and try it here. Diana?
Oh, I didn't say I had something to say. But...
Oh, I'm sorry. There are two Dianas here, so I got confused. I'm going to go ahead and mute you, Diana Sandoval. I apologize about that. Okay, Diana Lopez, did you have something to say? Okay, well, it looks like that's okay. Someone typed in a comment, and it looks like she said, why don't we let the kids choose the toy instead of offering a toy from the character? Instead of the adult offering the toy, why don't the children choose what they want to play with instead? I think that's a really good point, because definitely in Kaleidoscope, during the child-directed playtime, we encourage the adult to follow the child's lead, right? But then in this video, it was definitely the adults pushing a toy on the child. But I think that the point I think the video was trying to make was that as the adult was offering a toy, they chose very specific toys depending on the gender of the child. And I think that's what they were trying to get at. And I apologize for anyone who has any technical difficulties with the microphone and the speakers. We'll try our best to accommodate as we go along. If anything, definitely type something into the question box if you have something to say but your microphone is not working. We definitely encourage that. Does anyone else have any input on this topic about toys and play and gender stereotypes? or maybe even want to talk a little bit more about how the toys children play with in their childhood may determine their future.
So Brianna said one unspoken point that seems to be being made here is that girls' toys are inferior to boy toys. And I'm picking up on that bias as well. And a lot of this research, I see that. I see that kind of sentiment either overtly or covertly infused here in the research and a lot of things. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think either way, I think both toys are good, but it's when you automatically assume that maybe a girl wouldn't be interested in a science toy, or maybe automatically assume that a little boy wouldn't be interested in a sparkly toy. I think that that can have some detriment. And since there is such a big push for, you know, STEM activities and such a huge push on science and engineering and mathematics in our economy, I can see why directing female children over and over to toys that don't develop those skills or don't allow them to explore those interests can be detrimental.
Yeah. And we have some other comments coming in. Mabel has mentioned a point to think about the media and advertisements that are around us and how that affects children's development, this aspect of what they're learning. And it looks like Jennifer also wants to say something. So Jennifer, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking that as far as in the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups, it is, you know, great to offer, to have lots of toys available and offer, but I also think it could be taken a step further and really utilize some of those materials that talk about the things that children learn from playing with different activities and different toys, because that, you know, those will go, of course, for both genders. And so maybe if we can encourage caregivers to think about what children learn from these different activities and toys, they're going to see the benefit whether they're there with their boy child or their girl child. So just kind of another plug for utilizing some of those materials.
Thank you. And if you don't have access to those materials, email us and we will get those right to you. Anyone else? Any thoughts? Okay, well, this is actually a really good transition to what we were going to talk about next. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the toy market right now in the US specifically. And we already talked, I think Wisteria mentioned something a little bit about this just now. As you already know, there are a lot of stereotypes when it comes to toys and children. And right now in the general toy market, a lot of the toys that are available that are marketed for boys, a lot of them are blue. And like we had already mentioned, they're different than the toys that are marketed toward girls. They tend to be more educational, more challenging. They tend to promote more spatial intelligence and the development of that, as well as physical confidence. And by spatial intelligence, that means like being able to solve spatial problems like navigation, visualizing objects from different angles in space, image recognition, and noticing fine details. Those types of skills that can be gained through toys that are often marketed toward boys are the types of skills that are needed for the STEM field. STEM is short for science, technology, engineering, and math. And this field is mainly dominated by men. You don't see women as often in this field. So that's just something to think about when we think about the toys that our children play with and how that may be developing skills for them later on in life that are really important. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have toys that are marketed toward girls, and a lot of them, as you all notice, tend to be more like pink colored, and they focus more than the boy toys on beauty and domesticity. So that meaning kind of toys related to cooking or clothes, makeup, hair, sewing, and whatnot. And these types of toys are very similar to the toys that were available for girls in the 1950s and 1960s. And that's a bit of history that Wisteria will talk about soon in the next slide. And there's nothing wrong really with, you know, these types of toys being available for these kids. I think the point that we want to get across is that there are less toys that are made intentionally for girls that are more educational and challenging, and there are less toys that are marketed toward boys that relate to, beauty and domesticity, and that's sending unequal messages to the kids. And we need to think about how this affects their learning development as it comes to gender. Any questions or thoughts about that? I think that this is important to think about no matter where you lie on the spectrum of what your opinions are about gender stereotypes. It's important to think about really the context that we live in, and when you walk down the toy aisle, like, what are you seeing? Anyone? Any comments, questions at all? All right, well, let's see. We will go on to, oh, it looks like someone has a comment. So the question is, if boys are attracted to girl toys, are they experiencing a deficiency in their development? No, I don't think that's the case at all. I think, as Wisteria pointed out earlier, it's very natural and normal and developmentally appropriate for boys to be playing with toys that are stereotypically boy toys, but it's also very normal for boys to be interested in playing with toys that are stereotypically girl toys. It's just a time of exploration and learning, and they're, when they see a toy that's maybe supposedly meant for a girl, that just means that they're curious and they're interested and they want to play with it. It looks like Diana Sandoval can have a comment, and she can't unmute herself. So I'll try to unmute you, Diana, and see how that goes. Diana?
Okay, now,
oh,
yeah, now it's working.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we have a choice, right, to give our children all kinds of toys and not, think of them. I guess you're talking about how they're marketed, but
yes.
I know, yeah, and that is what happens at our play and learn groups, is the children choose, and and all things are offered.
Right, and I think it's just important to think about toys as toys being toys. Like, before commercialism in the toy market, there was once a time when toys were just toys. There weren't girl toys in the aisle and then boy toys in the aisle. They were just toys. And I think it's important to go back to that time and think about that. Thank you for your comment, Diana. We definitely do always have a choice. All right. Moving forward. I need to click the slide to move. There we go. Okay, Wisteria will talk a little bit about history now.
Okay, so just to once again provide proof of these gender stereotypes, you can just look at this and see which one is which, and that it's super divided, and that these toys aren't intermixed in together for all kids. There's like a specific aisle for what boys should like, and there's a specific aisle for what girls should like, and it starts even as early as infancy, when babies arrive here on the planet. A lot of times the adults around in the community, they assign pink for girls and blue for boys. But it's interesting because upon doing a little bit of research, there have been moments in history where it was recorded that pink was actually a color for boys because it was considered a watered down version of red, and red was viewed as a boy's color because it's a very powerful color. So that's just interesting. That's just an interesting tidbit about how this type of stuff is so arbitrary as we move through the cultural context. And during World War II, actually, a lot of women went to work in factories, and they took on non-traditional positions to help, produce war supplies and etc. While the men away were fighting. And in those settings, they weren't necessarily, assigned to pink. Actually, if you look at some of the old images of the lady with the bandana with her arm, we can do it. She's wearing all blue, and she's wearing Rosie the Riveter, yeah, and like the red bandana. So you can see that toughness that was there for females too, and they used blue for that. But after the war, after the war ended, everybody kind of returned to their quote unquote traditional gender roles, and that was around the mid 1940s. So you see, in the 50s where the whole idyllic scene of the man and the housewife, and during that time there was a huge emergence of pink products for women, household appliances, clothing, cosmetics, and the beauty industry really soared. So it was like something was a little bit driven by commercialism, definitely, if not driven by commercialism, like helped out, assisted to reiterate that there are separate colors for each and there are separate preferences for each gender. And then just to throw in also, not everybody fits neatly into the box of boy or girl, man or woman. So having these two categories and having them so clearly separated and clearly defined, narrowly defined, it's actually not helping anybody.
I just want to make a quick note that if you look at these coloring books, it says the Beautiful Girls Coloring Book, which is referring to the girl's appearance. And then the quote unquote boy coloring book, that's blue, is the Brilliant Boys Coloring Book, and that's alluding to performance. So again, we see this stereotype right here, and something that's just simple as a coloring book.
And then to take it even further, the gender stereotypes we see in toys aren't just about the colors. The actual toy itself can be, you know, geared toward a certain stereotype. So, you know, domestic toys like cleaning items, kitchen sets, sewing machines, you know, even if it's a blue one, you know, it's usually going to be marketed for girls or geared toward a gender stereotype. And it's good for kids to play with all toys, definitely, but we just to be aware that these stereotypes do exist in both the colors of the toys, the type of the toy, and then the kind of social message behind the toy. If a toy is not geared toward a specific gender, we can call it gender neutral. And we will ask you now to look at the toys on the slide and tell us which toys seem marked for girls and boys and which ones seem more gender neutral. And this can be debatable as well. So, you know, we have the marketer's intent here, and then we also have our own cultural and social lenses that we're bringing forward too. So maybe a toy that, you know, due to our own preconceptions, we might think is a toy just for little boys. Maybe other people see that as a toy for either gender or a gender neutral toy. So it's all fluid and flexible. And so if anybody has any comments about what they're seeing on the screen, as far as boy or girl toys, feel free.
Oh yeah, Diana Lopez just gave a really nice comment. She says that when you have a baby, you as the parent choose the toys when they're very young, right? But later, as a child grows, they begin to choose their own toys and their own interests, and that's very true. So when you're an infant, you're not so mobile. You know, adults are pushing toys on you often, but as you develop and you get more mobility, and then you start choosing what you want to play with, and I think that's a really good point to make. Thanks, Diana. And I guess we'll just take one last glance at the slide and kind of sort out what you think are more gender-specific toys and more gender-neutral toys.
And I think going along with Diana's comment about, you know, parents choosing the toys and then it moving on, you know, as children get older, they choose their own toys. I think it's really good for the adults in the lives of children to be mindful that we actually provide the access to the toys. Mm-hmm. So kids can choose their own toys, but we want to make sure we're keeping the doors open so that kids can have lots of choices and maybe not put our own biases that we've grown up with into the range of the selection that we're offering to them.
That's a good point to make. Just like in the Kaleidoscope group, as a facilitator, you are essentially choosing which toys you have available, right? But then the children, when they come, they can choose what they want to play with. So that's good to keep in mind. All right, so we'll go to the next slide to talk more about these toys.
And so here are some pictures of toys that we thought seem to be marketed toward a gender stereotype, and then some toys that we perceive to be more gender neutral, not so heavily marketed toward a particular gender stereotype.
All right, so, and definitely think about your own group right now and think about what kind of toys do you have, and the balance between gender neutral toys and gender specific toys.
Anna, so
go ahead.
So we just have some tips here to foster healthy gender development. So, you know, just like we were saying earlier, keeping the options open for kids, not restricting the possibilities of what they can and can't play with, or restricting the possibilities of what they're exposed to. It's good to open that up a little bit, you know, so they can explore. Everyone has different opinions around this and different sensitivities around it and different values, but some ways to kind of lean in the direction to, you know, make children feel more comfortable exploring and to kind of not push gender stereotypes onto children are here on this slide. So choosing toys, books, games, activities that involve diverse gender roles in a dramatic play area, maybe offering a variety of materials and dress-up items for children to explore, maybe gender neutral ones, maybe traditionally ones geared toward girls mixed in with ones traditionally geared toward stereotypical boys, just maybe a mix so everybody can try out everything. Avoiding assumptions that the child will not be interested in an activity because of their gender, kind of what was happening in that video that we watched earlier, and using inclusive words and actions within the group instead of saying hello boys and girls, because remember, not everybody might fit into those categories, maybe not everybody wants to, and then we don't always have to view children through this dichotomous lens, you know, just opening it up for more inclusive language, and then inspiring children by placing images around the space of different people in a variety of roles. So an example of this is on the next slide. And I really like this slide because this comes from all around the world, different cultures. So these are people that are in non-traditional gendered occupations.
All right. So we won't go over all of these bullets in great detail, but I just wanted to summarize some general things that we wanted to offer to you to continue to think about as you foster healthy gender development in your Kaleidoscope group. And again, if you are interested in going into this slide more deeply, you can take a look at it when we send the PDF and the recording. This slide basically mentions a few things. You need to think about the balance of toys in your group, the gender neutral toys you may or may not have, or the gender specific toys you may or may not have. And I'll put a plug in here to think about using a lot of household items and recyclable items to create activities in your group, especially, I know toys are really just Ghibli type of funding and not everyone has the budget for that, but empowering your group and yourself to use what you already have at home to create activities. And when you are creating them yourself, you have all the power to make it as gender neutral as you want or not. So that's just a plug. And then also something to think about, as we already mentioned, is to think how adults in your group use language with children, specifically like pronouns, for example. So when you sing songs during group time, are you always using the pronoun he? Do you ever use the pronoun she? Or would you think it might be better to sometimes switch it up and use they and to be more neutral? If you are an adult or playing with some children and you have stuffed animals, how do you use pronouns? Is the bunny rabbit a she? And why did you choose it to be a she? Why not a he? And just to kind of think about those things. Also to think about color as well. In activities, do you offer a variety of different colors that are non-stereotypical? Or they're only, you know, blue and pink items to designate boy and girls in the activity? Just have those in mind. And again, if you have any feedback on these suggestions or you try some of them and they went well or maybe not well, definitely let us know. We definitely want to continue the conversation on this. This is a quote that we found when we were creating this webinar, and I'll go ahead and read it. It's from Scholastic. The quote is, "Your own values may be in conflict with the gender expectations that are followed in the children's homes. Listen and learn from the children's families and discuss your point of view and theirs. Try to find solutions on common ground, but always support family cultures and traditions while attempting to create an environment of equity. I personally like this quote because I felt like it captured a lot of the messaging we wanted to deliver in this webinar, and it brings up the balance between creating this nurturing, equitable environment in Kaleidoscope, but also realizing that you need to respect the cultures and traditions of your participants. And that's difficult. I think that's definitely a lot easier said than done. And so to kind of dig deeper into that, we wanted to talk more about your role as a facilitator in the Kaleidoscope and your interactions with caregivers and how to approach these types of difficult conversations. And we wanted to talk a little bit about what we suggest would be good things to do and maybe things to refrain from doing. And one of them is that caregivers, if they want to have conversations about gender stereotypes and they're willing to, those are great opportunities to learn and to get to know them better as well. But it's not something that you can necessarily force, and we don't really suggest that. If a caregiver may not be interested that day in talking one-on-one about a gender stereotype that you noticed when they were playing with your child, definitely don't push it and don't force it. What we do really want to encourage is that you continue to cultivate meaningful and respectful relationships with the caregivers, and over time, as you get to know them, they'll be more comfortable in having these types of conversations. And also think about, you know, if someone is maybe giving signals that they're not interested in having this conversation, it could just be that it's not private enough. That may be a conversation that someone wants to have alone with you, like before and after group or off to the side, but maybe not during the time the actual group is running. So we don't encourage you to force these conversations upon people when they don't want them. We definitely encourage you to provide resources and information and support and chances to learn. And this can be done in a variety of different ways. You can weave caregiver learning on this topic. You can offer resources like pamphlets on child development related to gender, and you can model. Definitely modeling is a great way for caregiver learning in Kaleidoscope. An example of this would be that you could model using performance words and words related to appearance for both boys and girls and all children, essentially. Think about using words that are stereotypically used for boys, but use them for girls, like calling girl children, you know, intelligent and smart, for example. Definitely think about ways you can weave this in Kaleidoscope more seamlessly. It doesn't have to be a separate lesson at the end of the group. It could be throughout in little ways. And something that we also wanted to note as we're having these conversations, to think about culture and generational factors that may be influencing people's opinions, and think about how yours may be different than a caregiver's and why that is so. So using that lens can be very helpful in understanding where people are coming from. So given this information we just went over, we wanted to give some space for everyone to practice what it would be like talking to a caregiver in a specific situation. So for example, if you're at your group one day and there's a child, a boy, who is playing with a toy, a pink pony or a doll or whatever it may be, and their caregiver doesn't want them to play with it, how would you address that situation? And then on the flip side, I have 2 slides. You can choose either scenario. Maybe it's a girl actually, and she's playing with a toy, and her caregiver doesn't want her playing with that toy because they might think it's too masculine. So you can choose either situation, and we'd like to hear from any of you how you would approach this scenario, and if you actually have a specific experience in mind that you've already gone through in your group that has occurred and you want to share that and how you walked through that, that would be great as well. So anyone can speak at any time, feel free to. We'll give a moment for people to think how they approach this situation, because I know it's tricky. And of course, it's going to depend on the age of the child and the context, but in general, like, how would you approach this scene? Anyone? That's okay if no one has any comments. I just wanted to give people an opportunity to give an example if they wanted to, or to offer any suggestions. All right, so Diana Sandoval, looks like we're having some trouble with mute. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute Diana Sandoval really quick. See if it worked. Diana, can you hear us? Oh, let's try it again.
Okay, now it's working.
Oh,
okay.
great. Thank
I'm
you.
not sure why. Okay. Yeah, most of the families we work with, I think, are pretty aware of not gender stereotyping. But sometimes, you know, if there's children who are more on the outskirts of the continuum, you know, they might get more attention. And so I'm always aware of commenting on how children have all their own interests. And isn't that amazing how they just start developing their personalities and interests so young? And even in my baby groups, we start noticing how these children have, you know, as under 1 year of age, have their personalities and interests, and often they might not match the parents. So I really think kind of bringing that awareness at a really young age about how important it is to honor the child's emerging sense of self can help. And even like this picture of the little boy with all the dolls, you know, to soften it, you could say, oh, he's practicing to be a dad, you know, things like that, just to, and oh, that child maybe, you know, he loves wild hair on that pony, you know, things you can just kind of comment that in a way that honors the child's interests without labeling it as boy or girl. And I guess the other thing I try to do as a facilitator is, you know, what might come up more often maybe is that a parent, because they know their child well, they've kind of come to their own sense of how they let their child explore whatever they want to explore. But another parent who's unfamiliar might feel a little bit more surprised by the toy choices, and so that kind of approach can work too. Yeah, this child, boy, they really like this. They're exploring this. It doesn't mean it's forever, but you know, honoring that. We do have one mom who's an older child, a first grader, has identified as trans, and so it's you know it was really great to be able to just support that mom and have conversations with her about how what she's focusing on is her child's sense of self. And at this moment in time, she needs to honor what the child is saying and asking for, and keeping that sense of self intact. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys.
It does. Thank you. You give so many great examples. It's really important during these years that children are able to identify a sense of self in a safe way. And again, we already mentioned that this time when they do that is going to affect them for the rest of their lives later on. And you made a comment about the boy with the dolls and how you can make general comments and about that. And I like how you said that, because it doesn't always have to be like a big serious conversation with the caregiver about, you know, gender stereotypes and toys. It could be, you know, casual moments of you offering a piece of information to provide some caregiver learning, like, oh, you know, he's playing with the babies because he's practicing how to be a dad one day, and he sees, you know, mom and dad holding babies when they're at Kaleidoscope, or he sees his mom holding babies and dad holding babies when they're taking care of the younger siblings. So making those connections in a very just genuine, natural, and not intimidating way is really good. It doesn't always have to be, I think we need to talk about gender stereotypes after the sessions. So it doesn't have to be like that. So that, yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's definitely.
Yeah, I mean, even more general. Oh, he has such a big heart. He's so loving. Look at how he loves that baby.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone?
Oh, one more thing I did want to say.
Yes, please.
I did want to say that and also this idea, you know, that in the language and how we talk to the children, to just help them see that their peers have different interests. And it's like, oh, that child likes to do this. Oh, you like to do that. Just that whole thing of, keeping it that general so that when they see something, earlier one of the slides said that children start to be notice that they are a curiosity if they like to do things, like dress in different ways. But it's really, they pick that up from the adults. Naturally, they wouldn't do that. So if you say, yeah, Tommy likes this. What do you like? Just to normalize that everyone has different interests.
Yeah. Thank you, Diana. The other Diana Lopez, has made a comment about how she has a lot of gender-neutral toys in her group, and she's noticed that a lot of the girls in the group like to play with cars, and it's definitely not a problem with the adults in the group. It's very open, and they're okay with that, and that they also have kitchen toys, and everyone plays with that too. So that's a great example of just having an open and welcoming environment where any child can play with any toy in Kaleidoscope. And the rules at home may be different for them, but when they come to Kaleidoscope, they're welcome to play with whatever they are interested in. Some examples I wanted to give just from things I've seen in the field, because I visit groups a lot every week. An example would be if there's a caregiver who has a son and the caregiver doesn't want their son to be playing with dolls, and they're very adamant about that. Think of ways where you can have a compromise and have a situation where the values and beliefs of the caregiver is being respected, but also the child can still continue to play and develop that skill. So an example would be maybe you use teddy bears instead, and the boy can dress up teddy bears, and that way everyone is happy. Another example I've also seen is when a young boy really wanted to wear dresses and his mom was uncomfortable with that. And this is something that happened at home a lot too. He'd wear his sister's dresses and want to go to Kaleidoscope wearing dresses, and she just didn't feel like it was culturally appropriate for her culture for her son to do that and for her to allow her son to do that. So as a compromise, they let him wear dresses, but they had him wear dresses that were made for males from their culture. And so I found that to be like a really nice compromise as well, because he could continue to wear the type of clothing he was most comfortable in, but also it was respecting their traditions as well. And also it would connect him to their culture by wearing those types of clothes. So those are just some examples, real life examples actually that I've seen that you can think about as you are coming across these in your groups. And if no one has anyone else to say on these scenarios, we'll move along. If you do have something you would like to add, now would be the time to send a message or unmute yourself. Otherwise, we will continue. So much related to what Diana was saying, we wanted to give some more concrete, tips on how to approach these situations when talking to caregivers about gender stereotypes and, for example, the toys that children are playing with. And an example, some sentences we just wanted to plug in that you can use in your group. You could approach and say, I understand that your child is playing with blank or wearing blank and that makes you uncomfortable. So acknowledging how they feel and recognizing it. You could also say, I see that you prefer that your child does not play with blank. And then gently you can ask, do you mind if I ask why? And that's when you can kind of read whether they're interested in having this conversation or not, or, you can decide what you want to do at that point. As Diana had also mentioned in the past, talking about child development is a great angle, and that's an angle that we really encourage you to take. Talking about how the child is learning when they're playing with that item is really important. So you could say, for example, from a child developmental perspective, when we see this kind of play, from a child development perspective, it is a way for them to explore and learn about the world, try different ideas, and copy what their family members and community does and the people in the media are doing. And it's very normal and it is very natural. So making sure that the caregiver feels that this isn't out of the ordinary and that it's not an extremely unique thing, all kids do this, is really important. And I just also want to add in that these types of conversations can be difficult to have, but the more you get to know your group and your participants and build that relationship, the easier these conversations will be. And that I know is something that takes time, but definitely has really huge rewards, the more effort that you're able to put into it. And again, with the angle of child development, to kind of give a broader context to a caregiver about this and what is going on in a larger scale, taking the item that that child is playing with and connecting it to what skill their child is learning and how it relates to school readiness and life skills can help them understand the long-term impact and rewards of this. So for example, you could say, oh, like when your child plays with blank, they learn and develop blank. So for example, oh, like when your young daughter plays with this puzzle with blue trucks on it, she is learning and developing problem-solving skills. When your son plays with dolls, he is learning and developing compassion, and he's learning how to be a parent, and so on. And connecting it to how this will help them later on in life, I think is really useful because caregivers, they want their kids to be ready for school and they want them to develop life skills. And sometimes it just takes a reminder to let them know that that is happening when they're playing, especially with like a certain item. So hopefully that's useful, and definitely the list I have right here on this slide is not complete. Like there are many different items that children learn through different play. And does anyone have any questions about that? Does that make sense? I'm sure many of you have used these in your groups already. We talked a little bit about this during the 101s. All right. So we talked about the facilitator role and talking with the caregivers specifically and addressing those situations. And now Wisteria will talk a little bit about how do facilitators talk to children, because they're also in the Kaleidoscope group as well.
Yeah, so children, they say what's on their mind, and they're straight shooters, kids, those kids are. So you might hear things, children saying things to each other, or discussions coming up amongst children. So we have a couple of examples on here. So you might hear somebody saying, "You're a boy and you can't play in the kitchen." And so a great way to kind of like intervene or kind of facilitate that conversation into a more healthy and inclusive direction would not necessarily to be say, yes, boys can play in the kitchen, but switch that language and edge it toward a more inclusive terminology. So when you hear, "You're a boy and you can't play in the kitchen," try saying, "Everyone can play in the kitchen and learn how to make a recipe and clean up." And then, "Do both of you want to help me to bake a cake?" So kind of pulling everybody in and reducing that talk of boy, girl, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. Just kind of bring that language back to everybody, and then giving everybody an opportunity to move forward and to participate. Another example that we had is, "You're a girl and you can't wear that fireman costume." So again, not saying like girls are firemen too, getting away from that language and saying anyone can be a firefighter. All kids here can dress as a firefighter if they want to, and just kind of help opening it up to let kids know that it's okay, and that and when kids say stuff like this, they're not doing anything wrong. Like as we were showing in the child development slide, that especially like kids when they're like pre-K age, they're starting to develop a sense of rules and norms, and they just follow what they know, and they're able to pick up on cues and run with it. And so they're not necessarily trying to exclude their friends and their group mates, but maybe just sometimes they need a little bit of help to kind of reframe and go to a more inclusive way of relating with each other. Okay.
And I will also do another plugin about caregiver learning and modeling, because I'm using this language and saying these types of vocabulary with children that are inclusive. Again, like caregivers are listening to you, and they're going to pick up on these messages and how you interact with the kids, and they'll learn from it, and they will hopefully adapt to it and do it too if they feel comfortable, if they want to. So definitely keep that in mind.
And then we can just open it up as well to ask the group, have any of you heard kids saying stuff like this to each other? I know when I used to be a preschool teacher, and I would hear stuff like this almost every day. Just kids are trying to figure out who they are, who their peers are, and where everyone fits in. So sometimes they need a little bit of help, but if anybody has any examples of things that they've heard or ways that they've talked to kids about this stuff.
No worries. If you think of something and feel like sharing it with us a little later, feel free to do so. We are coming towards the end of the webinar. Oh, this is you.
Yeah. So yeah, we just have some resources here, and it's different type of resources from different types of sources, from the very academic to the very community-minded perspectives from different people on this topic. So like Kim was saying earlier, we will send out the slides to this presentation, so you'll get all these sent to you.
And if you come across any materials that you find really excellent that aren't on this slide, because there are tons, I'm sure, feel free to send that to us if you'd like to share them, because we're always looking for resources to continue to learn for yourselves, but also to provide facilitators when they are seeking some information.
Okay, and so as Kim said earlier in the webinar, the whole goal of this presentation and us coming together today was to to have this discussion and to open it up so that we can continue this discussion beyond the webinar and we can continue to learn and contemplate these things. As facilitators, you do not have to be experts. We're just here to, provide support, and facilitators are just there in the groups to provide support and facilitate the learning process and the relationship building between groups of people. And just always remember to keep your mind on the common goal, which is, we all want what is best for children, the caregivers of the group, the facilitators, your communities, we all want what is best for children. So just approaching this whole topic from that angle can really help. And so, if you do have any final questions or comments about this topic, feel free to let us know now, or going forward, if something pops into your mind later on, feel free to shoot an email our way. You can keep in contact with us. Most of you should have both Kim's and my personal emails, and then also the kpl@childcare.org. That comes to the whole team at Child Care Resources, Kaleidoscope Play Learn.
And we scheduled to end at 2:30, so we have about 15 minutes, so it's plenty of time to chit chat and talk about different perspectives and whatnot. And it looked like Diana has sent in another message. Thank you. And she says that, quote, "Unfortunately, in my group, I see different kids every week, and sometimes, they're not the same ones. But she often sees and hears something about girls playing with cars, like people maybe make comments about that or notice that. And she says that she'll get more focus during that activity and say things like, 'Wow, you're a very good driver,' to the girl who's playing with the car," which I think is great, because again, there are stereotypes about girls playing with cars, and also who are good drivers and who are not good drivers, right? And so really, yeah, thank you, Diana, for sharing that with us, and I hope that goes well.
And I think following up with that comment as well, since these gender stereotypes are so prevalent, and since, as we were talking earlier about the different types of compliments that are often given to little boys and little girls, as children internalize that, they might think that they have to perform or behave in a certain type of way based on their gender in order to get approval. So I like Diana's idea to, compliment and give the little girl a compliment in a different way when she's doing something that's not, that goes beyond just being pretty or being sweet. So I think that's a really great idea.
Anyone else? Well, thank you for joining us today. We're really happy that people registered for the webinar, and we hope it was useful and that it sparked some thinking. And again, like we said, this is a continuing conversation. It isn't end here necessarily. Again, here's our contact information. It will send out shortly this week the PDF and the recording as we said. And again, if you enjoyed this webinar, definitely look at the other topics we have on our YouTube channel. You can watch those at your own pace. Anything else?
Thanks for being here, everyone.
Yes, thank you, and have a very good afternoon.